This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals. If you're ready to break free from diet culture and reclaim the life it stole from you, learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, health at every size, body liberation, and taking down diet culture. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm an anti-diet registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and author of the book, Anti Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating, which is available now wherever books are sold. Join me here every week as I interview interesting people from all different backgrounds about their paths toward peace with food and their bodies. And by the way, on this show, we bleep out diet culture stuff like weight and calorie numbers, but we don't censor swear words or other adult language, so listener discretion is advised.
Anti-diet revolution, we're for health at every size. Eat the foods you like. Food Psych.
Hey there, welcome to episode 265 of Food Psych. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and if you're currently celebrating the holidays, I want to wish you a happy holiday season. If you're hearing this during or after the new year, then happy 2021, and I really hope this is a better year than last for all of us. Today, I'm talking with coach, author, and Anti Diet Riot Club co-creator Harri Rose about how to avoid the wellness diet and other forms of diet culture in the new year, how diet culture is trying to infiltrate the anti-diet movement, the harms of social media, despite it also being a tool for connection, life beyond body positivity, and so much more. I can't wait to share our conversation with you in just a moment. But first, it's time for Ask Food Psych. This week, we have a wonderful guest co-host, my fellow dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor, Ayana Habtemariam. And before we dive into the question and Ayana's answer, just a quick content warning for this one that both the question and the answer mention a specific elimination diet. So if hearing that is likely to be triggering for you, you can skip ahead to about 10 minutes. And of course, my standard disclaimer that these answers and this podcast in general are for informational and educational purposes only, aren't a substitute for individual medical or mental health advice, and don't constitute a provider-patient relationship. So this week's question is from a listener named Allison, who writes, "Hi, Christy. First, thank you so much for all that you do. I first heard about intuitive eating on your podcast and has really opened my eyes to all of the diet culture messages that surround me. I've had digestive issues ever since I was a young child and have struggled throughout most of my life to figure out the best ways to minimize those issues. Doctors I had always told me I was fine, and if something did not make me feel good, I should just not eat it. I once told a doctor that I sometimes felt sick after eating some types of dairy, and he told me I should just cut dairy out of my diet anyway because it's not good for me. What? A few years ago, I went to a DO who took my digestive complaints more seriously. She told me I was likely suffering from IBS and that I could try taking daily probiotics to see if that helped. She also suggested I try the Fodmap Elimination diet to see if I could identify a few trigger foods and then try to limit the frequency of eating those trigger foods. She also gave me some guides and resources to learn about FODMAPs. I did the Fodmap elimination and honestly felt so much better. I learned what foods made me feel worse, and over the last 4 years, I've noticed that my digestive issues tend to flare up when I eat a lot of those trigger foods. There are some fruits, veggies, grains, and dairies that I feel great eating, and others in each of those food groups that can trigger my digestive issues. I haven't just limited foods that diet culture categorizes as quote-unquote bad and only eat foods that diet culture categorizes as quote-unquote good. There are no foods that I eliminated entirely. And I'll still eat some of the trigger foods if I'm craving them or if there aren't many other options, which happens a lot when I'm traveling. However, if I'm not having a strong craving, I try to focus on picking up foods from the grocery store that are less triggering. After listening to your podcast for the last 6 months or so, I'm now struggling with figuring out if even having a list of quote-unquote trigger foods in the back of my head is a form of restricting that's actually bad for me, especially as I hear that some healthcare professionals don't think IBS is quote-unquote real. Is limiting foods that make me feel sick and change my ability to do things throughout the day because I feel sick a form of restriction that I need to unlearn? How do I incorporate my body's digestive reaction to foods into my decisions about the foods I eat? Thank you so much for your response. It's hard to know how diet culture has infiltrated my food decisions, and your work is really helping me be more careful about how I think and talk about food. So I would love to hear your answer to this, Ayana.
Okay. So, hi, Allison. That's a great question. There's a lot to unpack here. So, let's start with the first part, the doctor advising you that you were fine and just to omit a food group or a food that doesn't make you feel good, if it doesn't make you feel good. So, as someone who has a specific GI issue, I know through firsthand experience that this is a sort of general advice that isn't always helpful. It can take years of having a GI issue to learn what makes you feel good versus what doesn't make you feel good. And this is especially true if you don't have the guidance and support of an experienced and a well-rounded healthcare professional. So for one, and this is through no fault of your own, but the world we live in, we tend to ascribe moral value to foods, and this can disrupt our ability to notice and to feel how foods are making us feel because we may already have some preconceived notions, and those can have a pretty powerful influence over our thoughts and our feelings about the foods we're eating. And it can even change how we experience those foods in our bodies in a lot of cases. So to me, telling a person to omit a food group if it doesn't feel good is complicated. And I think it might even be a little irresponsible than it might appear on the surface because there's elements of restrictive diet culture and even assumptions about accessibility that underlies this sort of recommendation. And it could be well-meaning. Who knows? I think usually it is. And the doctor might actually believe that GI issues can be resolved in this way, but I personally don't think so. What I think is that it just puts people on a path of relying on restrictive health trends that just become more and more restrictive and unrealistic and unsustainable over time. Because the only answer to your GI issues becomes remove foods from your diet. And there could be other things. If you remove one food and then you feel better and it's like, okay, well, now I'm having this issue, and then you begin to remove another food. And so the example that you gave about the doctor telling you to just cut dairy out of your diet because you told them that you felt sick after eating some types of dairy is just an example of how some healthcare providers don't consider the bigger picture. It doesn't sound like they asked you what specific types of dairy made you feel sick, nor did they ask you about your overall diet. They didn't ask you about if you are eating regular and consistent meals, which is really important. They didn't ask you about the quantity of dairy you ate or anything. And these are all important questions because it's not always the food causing the issue. It can be a number of interrelated and overlapping factors. Also, it's usually not possible or realistic for a person to cut out an entire food group. It can feel very restrictive. It can lead to preoccupation with the specific food or food group and feelings of being out of control around that specific food or food group. So I think it's good that you questioned that and you were a little taken aback by it. And so another part of your question about the low Fodmap diet. So I'm glad to hear that you felt better after doing the low Fodmap diet. It sounds like you did it in the steps where you restrict and reintroduce, and then you tailor it to your needs. And real quick for anyone who's listening, Fodmaps are, and I know Christy has talked about this on other episodes, but just a quick reminder that Fodmaps are fermentable carbs that aren't always well absorbed by some people's bodies, and they can cause GI distress. So if you're considering a low Fodmap diet, it's really important to talk to your healthcare provider first, because if you don't have IBS, and even in some cases, if you do, removing these foods from your diet can still do more harm than good. A lot of Fodmap foods support normal gut bacteria. And so this isn't something that you should just be restricting, or it shouldn't be a first line defense against GI issues, because they do have important components in them. And so, Allison, it sounds like you've been paying attention to what foods work for you and what foods don't. It doesn't sound like you're restricting food groups or specific foods, and you also take accessibility into consideration, like when you're traveling. And that's important. You also mentioned that if you're craving a particular food, you'll allow yourself to have it. And if you don't have a strong craving, you go with a less triggering food. And to me, these all sound like good practices. So just wanted to mention that. I also wanted to go down to your question about struggling with figuring out if even having a list of trigger foods in the back of your head is a form of restricting that's actually bad for you, especially as you hear that some healthcare professionals don't think IBS is quote unquote real. And so I'm curious to know that if you were to learn that IBS wasn't real, would that change how you took care of yourself? And if the answer to that question is yes, or maybe, or possibly, then I think that that's an invitation to get curious about the intention behind your behaviors and behind your choices. Because that makes me wonder if you're managing symptoms that you're feeling, that you're actually feeling in your body, or if it's more of a psychosomatic experience where your thoughts and beliefs are influencing physical symptoms in your body. And so I would explore that a little bit. I would probably explore it with a professional if possible. I also wouldn't focus so much on whether some healthcare professionals don't think IBS is real or not. What I would focus on, and I don't know if you're putting a lot of focus there, let me just say that. But what I would focus on is if you're managing your symptoms to the extent that you're able to do so. So focus on what you're feeling, focus on the reaction, what your body is communicating to you, and managing those things. Some other questions that I would ask you: are you eating regular, consistent meals for the most part? Are you truly basing what to exclude from your diet on information that was derived internally from you and experience versus rules? And also another question you had, so limiting foods that make you feel sick, that's not a form of restriction. In fact, I would say that that's a form of gentle nutrition. It's honoring your body by using that internal information, internally derived information, learned from previous food experiences. And it's important to keep in mind, too, that stress and prolonging hunger can also contribute to GI distress, and it can exacerbate symptoms of IBS. So just make sure you zoom out to look at the bigger picture and not the food. And to answer your last question, how should I incorporate my body's digestive reaction to foods into my decisions about the food I eat? I would say, as long as you have access to a reasonable variety of foods and the privilege to make a choice between two or more foods, it's up to you to make a decision about whether you're willing to deal with whatever reaction or consequence the trigger food will have. And so, for example, if you're eating for dinner like a slice of pizza, broccoli sauteed in garlic, and some meat, and you're like, that broccoli is really gonna give me some issues, and then you have an option of just some spinach with olive oil or something like that, and you know that you'll get intractable diarrhea from the broccoli, and the other food won't give you that, then you make an informed decision based off that information. So I hope that makes sense. It's ultimately your decision. But if you have access to a reasonable amount where you can make food choices in that way, you might want to listen to the experience that your body has communicated to you. Just as an example, I wanted to give another example. Hopefully this is helpful. I mentioned earlier that I have a GI condition, and there's a food that causes me a lot of pain when I eat it. And it's in my cabinet right now because my husband eats it. And I like it too, but I've tried time and time again to eat it, thinking that each time might be different, but it never is. It just hurts going down. And so it's not a food that you commonly find on the list of triggers for my specific conditions either. And so I found myself questioning if it was actually a real trigger. And that's why I kept eating it. I'm like, this can't be a real trigger. And I finally had to realize that it was I guess it was a little more than a year ago, I realized that it was. And I just had to trust my body's response to this food. And so what's interesting is that earlier this year, I happened to find this food listed on a resource written by a speech language pathologist. And I'm like, nobody has ever said that this is a trigger food. When you Google it, they always list all other kinds of foods. And so I felt really validated. And so I share that to say that it's okay to trust yourself first. It's okay to rely on what your body is telling you. It's really the best thing to do. And I think resources and information help, but we sometimes put more trust into those things than we do ourselves because it feels easier. Yeah. So like trust yourself, listen to yourself, try to tune out the external. And again, I think some of those resources can help, but just listening to yourself and to your body is the best thing that you can do. And finally, if you're able, it might help to work with someone who can help you work through some of these questions, and I would suggest a dietitian who's trained in or who has experience in intuitive eating or somatic nutrition therapy, and also has experience with gastrointestinal conditions like IBS. And I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. So thanks again to Allison who asked that question, and to Ayana Habtemariam for that great answer. You can learn more about Ayana and her work at trulyrealnutrition.com. That's trulyrealnutrition.com, and we'll put links to that in the show notes for this episode, along with links to other places to connect with Ayana online. To submit your own question for a chance to have it answered on an upcoming episode, you can go to christyharrison.com/questions. That's christyharrison.com/questions. I'm also answering occasional bonus questions in my newsletter as well, so you can subscribe to that at christyharrison.com/email for another place to get your questions answered. And if you want to ask me your question and have me answer it much more quickly and consistently, and actually ask me multiple questions every single month, you can come join my online course, Intuitive Eating Fundamentals, where I do an exclusive monthly Q&A podcast just for course participants. I answer all your questions. I've answered hundreds of them and counting, and you get access to all the previous answers that I've given in past episodes. Plus, you get to ask me your own questions and hear the ongoing future episodes. You also get 13 modules of self-study content about the principles of intuitive eating that really go into so much more depth about it than I can here on this podcast. You get interactive journal activities and workbooks, and you get a private community forum just for course participants where you can connect with other people who are on this anti-diet path and get support for breaking free from diet culture and healing your relationship with food and your body. If you're ready to make peace with food and reclaim the life that diet culture stole from you, you can learn more and sign up for the course at christyharrison.com/course. That's christyharrison.com/course. This episode of Food Psych is brought to you by ThredUp. When it comes to a major overhaul of your closet every season, there's only one place where you can shop all your favorite brands at once, and that is ThredUp. I love ThredUp. They are the world's largest online thrift store. They have up to 90% off estimated retail prices, and right now they have lots of great cozy sweaters from all of your favorite brands. It's thrifting with the convenience of online shopping because you can customize your search by your size, including plus sizes, your style, and your budget. So you can find the best deals instantly. I always recommend ThredUp for people who are looking to do an overhaul of your closet to get rid of triggering clothes that don't fit anymore and find clothes that really feel great and fit the body you have now. Get the styles you love at a fraction of the price. You'll look and feel good with ThredUp. And for Food Psych listeners, here's an exclusive offer just for you. You can get an extra 30% off your first order at thredup.com/foodpsych. That's thredup.com/FOODPSYCH for 30% off your first order. thredup.com/foodpsych for an extra 30% off today. Terms apply. And now, without any further ado, let's go to my conversation with Harri Rose. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
So it's interesting because I grew up in a house where my mum was like a full-time mum, and she cooked amazing, like home cooked she is still a really good cook. And so I had a lot of wonderful, like nutritious home cooked meals, but I don't have really any positive memories of liking my body. So I had a complex relationship with food for as long as I can remember. I'm sure when I was, like really, really small, I didn't, but because I picked up on messages that, I was kind of like a chubby kid, and also I was tall from even, when you're like even as a little girl, I was quite tall, and I picked up messages that there was something wrong with my body, or that I should dislike my body, and so that impacted my relationship with food from a young age. And there was a lot of arguments around food with my mum, around second helpings. I think I was a greedy kid, I guess, because the food is delicious, right? Like, food is one of life's pleasures, and my mum's a really good cook. But I have a lot of memories of there being a lot of arguments around like having second helpings and that kind of thing. And that's like before I got officially into dieting. There was a lot of arguments around food. And yeah, so I guess I guess I would say that my relationship with food, even from a young age, was quite complex.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it sounds like there was sort of interference from the outside with your relationship with food, right? Was it sort of the culture in your family that told you your body was too large? Was it doctors or peers? Like, do you know where that came from?
So it was from, I'm always so reluctant to say my mum, because it was, and like my mum, was only doing her best. And I'm always so reluctant because she's a great mum. You know what I mean? I don't want to be like bashing my mum, but she'd made a lot of body comments, essentially. She made a lot of body comments, and the friction, I know it was coming from a place of concern, but she didn't want me like putting on any more weight. And so she would try and intervene by saying just like body comments. But all that was doing was driving horrible disordered eating, a lot of secret eating from like, I'm talking like primary school. I would be secret eating. And I went on my first diet, like official. I went to Weight Watchers at the age of 13 with another, like a friend's mum who was also on Weight Watchers. And I really wanted to go on that diet. I guess it was encouraged because my mum wanted me to be happy. And, my mum is 70 now. She grew up in the era of dieting, and, she doesn't remember. It's quite, I often don't really share fully. I tried to talk to my mum once about the impact she had, and she was so mortified that I haven't managed to do it again. But she wasn't very critical of her own body. So it wasn't that she was on diet. She's in a straight sized, thin body. So it wasn't that I was picking up on her overt body stuff, but she was openly critical of my body. And from a place of, I guess, like health trolling, what we would call now, but concern. And yeah, so so from 13, started the kind of official dieting. Whereas before that, I was really messed up around food and disordered eating, but and my emotions, and feeling really like there was something wrong with me, because it's just all of that stuff that we know comes from feeling like you're not good enough, or there's something wrong with you. But it was 13 that I kind of went to Weight Watchers and had that feeling of, okay, if I can just follow this, like this is going to solve all my problems, because that's what diet clubs do, right? They go, oh, okay, here, follow all these rules, and then all your problems will be solved. And so that was when my official dieting journey started.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like such a fraught relationship with food from so early on.
Yeah. And with my mum too, like a real bone of contention. Food and my body were a real point of conflict with my mum too, for like many years, all through my teenage years.
Yeah. And it sounds like she really, like you said, she meant well. She was trying to help in a way that she thought was going to be helpful. But, turned out it gave you a lot of issues.
Oh, so many issues, and things like, oh, you've got such a pretty face, Harry. If you could just lose a bit of, if you could just lose some weight. And then when I started to lose weight, it's like, oh, almost there now. If you can just lose some weight off your legs. I'm just like, oh my, back, and I'm like, oh my God, mother, what were you thinking? But she was just trying to motivate me in a way that I know came from like a good place, but it was so damaging. It was so damaging. It really was awful. Yeah, it really like fucked me up.
Yeah. Oh my God. I can imagine. Like it's just interfering in your relationship with your body. I mean, it really strikes me too that as young as age 5, you were like wanting second helpings and being told no. And that was probably like your body telling you what you needed and like honoring your own hunger, right? Trying to get your needs met and then being told that you couldn't meet those needs. It's really like cutting you off from that intuitive relationship with food.
I don't think it was young as 5, but probably, I think probably like 8, 9, 10, 11, the kind of late, those in-betweeny teenage years was when I think I was growing because I'm tall and I was like a chubby kid, you know what I mean? But I do wonder sometimes, had I just been left to my own devices, you know what I mean? Like, who knows, you know what I mean? Like, maybe I would have just had a growth spurt but whatever, like it didn't happen that way. And I was getting messages of kind of conditions around my body being acceptable. Yeah. And then what happened was I went to Weight Watchers, and I remember that first meeting, and it's such a weird feeling when you go to a diet club of kind of you have that feeling of shame that you have to be there, but also the fact that you're surrounded by other people who feel the same way that you are. This is why why they have such a pull, right? Is that you feel that you're understood in these circles. And I was really good at dieting. Basically, I became like a points encyclopedia. I became obsessed because I was really like, great, this is where all my problems can disappear, and I can get like a boyfriend and all this kind of thing. And I did lose weight on, doing that diet. And then you have like the compliments, which also make you feel kind of shameful, but sort of you get pride in the fact it's a very particular feeling to be complimented on weight loss. I think you sort of want to beam with pride, but then you have that kind of shame of feeling like, well, wow, I must have looked awful before, or it's a very weird feeling, that and again being like praised by my mum, around her friends, or like, oh, isn't Harry's on a diet, she's doing really well, it's I can totally see like how that was meant to be motivating, but also just selling me a very, just sending me down a very destructive path. And then diet, I was really into dieting for like a long time, and became a serial yo-yo dieter for a solid decade. And I can go into a little bit more about like what happened further on my journey, if that's useful.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear that and to know kind of like because I think it's so interesting, this thing of losing weight and getting praise on a diet, which is so common. Like in the first time people diet, usually the first diet does result in some weight loss, not for everybody, but for some folks, it results in some weight loss, and then it's noticeable and people praise you. And then it sort of like seals the deal of, oh, this is what I want. I want to keep getting more of this. I want to like keep this up. But then nobody tells you from the diet clubs or the programs or whatever that the results are not going to last, right? That like the whole trajectory of a diet is short-term weight loss, long-term weight regain, oftentimes more gain than you lost. Like that's just how it is. So, I'm curious if you sort of went through that trajectory. It sounds like you did, because you said you were a serial dieter. So I'm assuming that one didn't just last. But how did you sort of see yourself when that inevitable weight regain happened on that first diet?
Yeah, so when I was around, say 16, I had 2 petite best friends in secondary school, and I just always felt too big. Just always felt like this giant person. And again, I'm like 5'9". I was really tall in school. I was taller than all the boys. And even when I look back at this photo. I've got a photo. I'm leaving school at so my last day of so I'm 16. I'm leaving this particular school, and there is like so nothing wrong with me. And I just remember just being so full of body shame, and just wishing so desperately that I could be this like petite. I always wanted to be like a really like pixie type elfin human that could just slink onto people's laps and and the other person wouldn't notice. And instead, I was this tall, curvy. I had long blonde hair. I just wasn't like that, and I really disliked my body so much. And by the time I was 16, I was really trapped in diet culture. Me and my friend Amy would obsess about diets, absolutely obsessed, talk about them all the time. Oh, I'd buy all the magazines, but I was still like a Weight Watchers fan. That was my go-to. And then what happened was at 17, when I left that school, I changed school and I was miserable. I was really miserable. I went away. I went to a boarding school, which was my dad's old school, and I had this vision of, I don't know, reading like Mallory Towers and all these guys. I was like, this is what it's going to be like. And I was so homesick and so miserable. And I just ate my feelings for that whole year, and I put on a lot of weight again. And so I just didn't know how to, eat intuitively, but I just was really lost. I was disconnected from my body. I put a lot of blame on my body, and then there was a lot of shame because of putting on a lot of weight again. So real big yo-yo, like a massive yo-yo. And then what happened was I became obvious to my parents that school was not right for me. So I came home and then I lost weight again on another diet. So like another swing the other way, just this up and down, up and down. And when I forgot to mention, but before that period, when I was sort of around that time when I was like 15, 16 and really wanting to follow the diet to the letter, I told you that my mum she is an amazing cook, and I would forgo all of her home cooked nutritious dinners for these microwave Weight Watchers meals because I knew exactly what, the calories was on the packet and I could tell exactly what it was. And I had no idea how to eat to make myself feel good. Everything was a battle. Food was a real battle. And by the time I was sort of 17, 18, well into, like my 19, 20 when I went to university, I had what I now know is an undiagnosed eating disorder. Lots of binging and purging, secret eating, late at night. And it's because I was absolutely convinced that I was like addicted to carbs, that I couldn't be around bread. All of these ideas that we come up with that say it's our fault that we can't achieve our body goal, when it's the diet's fault. It's the fact that, massively restricting causes the complete opposite. It's no wonder that you're binging when you're restricting. So I was in I look back at those years of particularly like all the secret eating and the binging and the purging with like such like compassion and just sadness that I was treating myself that way. It's a really lonely place to be, having this kind of secret disordered eating. Yeah, so really disordered from 17. Went at university, the same thing. But it was at university that I started to just lead a slightly different lifestyle. When you become independent, and I was going dancing a lot and just feeling a lot more, as I think lots of people do, like discovering who they are and slowly managing to extract myself. No, I say that. It lasted a long time, but the diet that I was, by the time I was in my mid-20s, I had started to heal my relationship. But what was really the trigger was when in my mid-20s, I trained to be a massage therapist. And it was in learning anatomy and physiology. I wasn't a science kid at school at all. It was learning anatomy and physiology for the first time in my mid-20s that I was like, wow, the body is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Like the fact that we have this phenomenal piece of, I call like bodies where like art meets nature and biology. Just with bodies in themselves are just amazing. And when you're learning massage and you're learning where the muscles are, and you're not looking at someone's physique in a critical way, like you look at your own body, you're just saying, okay, how can this is an arm, this is a leg, how can I treat this person? And I had to push myself to get a bit naked around other people, which was the kind of the first time, because things like changing rooms would be massively triggering for me. And so learning, that was like a 9-month professional diploma, and that was a real pivotal, like the first big shift in helping me heal my relationship with my body. Not getting out of diet culture necessarily, but just helping me become slightly less critical of my own body. That was a real big shift.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think for so many people, there are those like small steps out, right? I can so identify with that, of like having certain things in my career be small steps toward healing, but not anywhere near like a full leap. It's like diet culture was still around. Like when I was writing about food, for example, that was a big step for me, but it was not the be all end all. There was still a lot of diet culture talk, even among, people who wrote about food. But it was like starting to rediscover the pleasure in food was a big step for me.
Yeah, for me, the other thing that happened was that when I left university, I moved to London and I met a boy and fell head over heels in love and moved in and was just feeling really happy. And we were going to go to Ibiza, which is somewhere I'd wanted to go for like a really long time. And Ibiza, for people who don't know, is like a really big clubbing party island. And it's funny the stories that you have in your mind. I was like, only thin people go to Ibiza. Right, like only thin people go, and I had a similar story around like only thin girls go traveling, because I almost didn't go to Thailand because I didn't think I was thin enough. And anyway, so the moment was that I was going to go to Ibiza on this holiday, and so I hadn't been going to diet clubs. I'd been doing like my own thing, and oh god, so many other things along the way. But because of this holiday, I joined, and I remember just stripping everything out of my diet. I was eating pretty much nothing but like, and the scales just wouldn't move. They just stopped moving. And now it's because I look back at myself, I'm just like, well, because your body probably didn't need to lose any more weight. Like, my God. But I just thought, I can't do this. Like, it wasn't, again, like you're saying, it wasn't like there was this big pivotal, like, aha, I must get into body positivity and body acceptance. But I just thought, this is madness. I don't seem to be doing anything to like make this piece of metal like shift anymore. Like, there has to be like another way. And I'd like to say that I went on and never went on a diet again, but instead I fell into wellness.
Oh, so common, right, in this day and age.
Yeah.
What was that like? I'm so curious about that, because we were talking offline a little bit about how we both had such a similar experience with the wellness diet and falling into that food activism place. And so I'm curious how that came up for you.
Yeah. So what happened was, when I was at the same, all this kind of stuff was happening at the same time. So that was like the last official diet that I went on was that for that holiday. And I was just like, God, I can't do this anymore. There was just like I can't do this anymore. Like, it takes up so much brain space, and the circles of shame, and the planning of what you're going to wear or not wear. And like, it's awful. So that was the last thing I did. And I was training to do this massage therapy. And then I met a friend who was doing a health coaching qualification. And so we swapped. I was stopped massage for health coaching. And to be fair to Laura, she's still my friend, she really did help me heal my relationship with food. And it was that time where she was talking about like healthy fats. Like, now everyone knows that like nuts and avocados are like good for you, right? But at the time I was like, I can eat an avocado? You know what I mean? Because like avocado is like points or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just like, I'm like, nuts. And she was like, go and buy any cheese that you want to, you know what I mean? And I remember standing in the cheese aisle being like, I haven't eaten cheese, but all of these things that I deem to be like, in quotes, like naughty and all this kind of stuff. Like, she really did help me heal my relationship with food. So I had a really positive experience working with her, and I was feeling a lot better. And so I started to look into this health coaching course, and I invested, and I did my course with IAN, which is the, oh God, I can't remember, Integrative School of Nutrition or something, Institute of Nutrition. I really enjoyed my course, but looking back, there are some aspects of IAN which are problematic, and that is that they give you all of the information. They give you like it's like we've teach you over 100 dietary theories and you can just go with like whatever resonates with you. And I think that's problematic because they're not teaching people to be critical about science.
And they're not teaching like evidence-based theories either, right? It's like fad diets.
Oh, I remember, and there was like some of it that I was like, this is bonkers. Like there was David Wolf did a talk and it was like, I just ate nothing but for a week and then my eyes got so focused. I was like, this is nuts. I'd never come across David Wolf before. And at the time, I was like, what is this guy? Who is this guy? So yeah, it's definitely problematic. And how it manifested for me was that I was like, oh, okay, I'm not about weight loss anymore. I'm just about health, right? As it's so common for people. I'm just about health and I'm just cutting out all of this food because it's not about weight loss anymore. It's about how I feel. And I got really into like making like the smoothie bowls and cutting bananas into stars. And I just wanted to be like the next Deliciously Ella, who I don't know if she's a big wellness person over there, but she's a huge one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we know of her, I think, from the sort of like fallout of how wellness culture has been critiqued over there. And yeah.
Yeah. So I was really aspiring to be like Deliciously Ella and spending time before work. Why? Just drink the smoothie. It does not need to be in a bowl.
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
I even remember at the time being like, this doesn't make any sense, but that was just the trend. Anyway, so yeah, I really fell into wellness.
Did you get into like posting it on Instagram and stuff?
Yeah, I did. I did a little bit, but I feel quite thankful that I wasn't comfortable in my lack of nutritional information. Like I'm not a nutritionist. Like I even knew that back at the time. I started to work on my voice for Instagram and things, and I was like, actually, this doesn't feel right. So I'm happy about that I didn't pretend. I had the presence of mind to not try and blag my way into nutrition. It didn't feel right. But what happened was that I started to talk about loving my body and my journey to loving my body, which was happening. And I guess like it was probably correlated with the rise of the body positivity movement. And I started to coach people around getting off diets. I still look back at probably some of my original posts are quite wellnessy, but thankfully, but I was teaching intuitive eating. Well, I now know it's intuitive eating, and now I label as, I like credit it as intuitive eating, but it was something that I was doing myself, and I was finding that I was healing my own relationship with food. And so I'm so great. I'm so grateful to have found like intuitive eating and the anti-diet movement.
How did you find that? Like, how did you stumble into that?
I wish I could. I've done quite a lot of these interviews now, and I wish I could like have like one solid story of like, and then one day I. But sadly, I think it was gradual. I think it was Instagram and books. I think like Health at Every Size and Intuitive Eating just kind of came into my life. I think, yeah, it was a gradual process. Away from wellness into, and actually now my coaching is so much specifically, although I do teach intuitive eating, mainly my work is around self-compassion now. Really, so much of my clients, I don't want to say issues, but like a lot of the work is around self-kindness.
So important.
Oh my goodness, because if we can learn to be kind to ourselves, then everyone knows, I think, that how to feel good. People know that drinking water is good for them. People know that getting outside is good for them. But it's so much easier when we can feel like we're worthy of feeling good, and that we're worthy of, making choices that better our health. And or even, days where perhaps you don't want to do exercise because you're really tired. That's okay. Intuitively living from a place of curiosity and kindness. I mean, I bang on about curiosity and kindness all the time.
It's so important. And I'm so curious always about everything, but I'm curious about how you got from that place of like being sucked into wellness to embracing a more anti-diet intuitive eating approach, and also kind of like what it looked like for you when you were sucked into wellness. Because, this episode is going to be coming out like in the new year, and I know that wellness is going to be the big thing, right? And diet companies now position themselves as wellness companies. They actually even co-opt the terms anti-diet and intuitive eating and body positivity. So it's like so confusing these days, even more so than when we were going through all of the stuff.
Oh, definitely. And I feel like everybody, I feel it because I think it is. Everyone is obsessed with health now, right? I think it's in Instagram, and it's really hard to facilitate people seeing that health isn't entwined with like thinness, because there's just so it's like I feel like I spend a lot of my time battling the idea that somehow if you're allowed to love your body, then you're gonna just sit on the sofa all day, eat junk food, and just like never leave your house and like give up. I don't know. There's just such this strong idea that to be healthy, we should all be striving for health. And it's not a diet, it's about health, but you're actually just majorly restricting all the time. It's really hard. It's really hard out there these days, because you're right, diet culture has co-opted health like so massively. And just, the food shaming that comes, and January in particular is so rough. And particularly at the moment, we're going through a really difficult time because people's bodies are changing because of COVID and just the amount of fat phobia. We're recording a little bit before January, but just, the thought of what's coming is just, it makes me feel tired even thinking about it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Like the special brand of diet culture that's sort of attached to January, but then also COVID is going to be like nothing we've ever seen before, probably.
Yeah, get your battle armor on. Yeah. What was it like? My main memory of that period is, like I say, like making the smoothie bowls before work. I guess another part of that time was that I was really into the idea of strong, not skinny, which involved massively over exercising and only exercising because of how it would affect my body. And living in London is interesting because London has a particular, it's such a status symbol, wellness in London. There's a lot, it's massively privileged. It's very much like, I'm sure it's the same in lots of, I think it's quite a metropolitan thing, but it's about fancy spin studios, fancy weights classes, that whole,
Yeah,
that
the
stuff.
whole culture. And the picture of wellness being that like white, privileged, thin, able-bodied, young, cisgender person, right? Muscular, thin.
I was really obsessed with reading Women's Health and just really unaware of the insidiousness of, I really just remember thinking like, oh, I'm free from diets. You know what I mean? Like compared to where I was, which was about religious counting, I would avoid going out for meals. I was really obsessed with numbers, really when I was doing kind of like the traditional diet culture stuff, like that in a way is, at least you can call a spade in that particular type of, although nowadays you can't because it's WW whatever about that. But back in the day when like it was quite obvious when I was on a diet, like it was counting. And when I had got to that point where I was really into wellness, I was unaware genuinely of the damage that I was doing to my psyche, because I was just thinking I was striving for health and was really interested in food activism as you were, and Jamie Oliver going into schools and all this kind of stuff. Like there was a lot of big food activism was big here too, and I was really interested in that too. And I was really unaware of all of the stuff that I know now around privilege and the impact of, socioeconomic factors on people's weight and access to food. And quite frankly, ignorant. I really was, because I am very fortunate that, I have a lot of privilege, and I probably fit a lot of the criteria for being like a wellness influencer, quite frankly, apart from the fact that, I'm not classed as thin enough. Like I was really striving for that. I guess I can only say blind ignorance. I wasn't intentionally, my heart was in the right place, but that whole, it's very, the right word for me is insidious, because it's really steeped in diet culture. It's really steeped in privilege, and just a total unawareness of how it's just another diet. It's so restrictive. It's so privileged, like all of those fancy ingredients and the time it takes and the expensive exercise classes and all of that stuff. And I was totally hook, line, and sinker, really into wellness. And I'm just very grateful that it was my time during that was, I found the anti-diet movement, and couldn't believe that it was so radical to me to find people who were saying, like, you don't have to change your body to be happy. And that I remember feeling like that was an impossibility for me at the time. I was like, I know I'm going to be happy when, dot, dot, dot.
I think it's so interesting always to hear about people's processes. And it's hard sometimes to remember the process once you're on the other side of it. But a lot of people listening are probably in that process now of taking in some information from the anti-diet movement, hearing those messages and maybe being like, yeah, that can't apply to me, or only when I lose weight, right? And how did you sort of move through that?
Yeah, I started to, I think the first step was giving myself unconditional permission to eat. So I went on a really big journey. I didn't eat bread for probably a good 10 years or something. I would put bread on such a pedestal. I was like, don't leave me alone with bread. Me and bread,
the restrict binge cycle too, probably.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I remember exploring with curiosity the foods that I had put on a pedestal, and just being like, okay. And so until I became so comfortable with that food that it lost its power. And I remember being it's a scary process doing that unconditional permission to eat whatever you want. So I did it with bread. I always tell this story, but it was again a pivotal moment. In London, I'm sure maybe other places too, but there's the rise of fancy donut culture. So these donut shops.
Oh yes, we had that in New York too.
And I remember being like, I could never eat a donut for years. I remember, even in my teens and stuff, when my friends would eat donuts, and I would be like, can I have a taste of your donut? I could never imagine, if I ate a whole donut, the mental bashing that I would give myself if I would to do that. So I remember, fast forward 10 years, I was like, I'm going to eat a donut. Okay, I'm going to do this thing. So donuts was the next on the list. And I remember getting this donut, eating it with mindfulness, and being like, okay, right, what's up, donut? And I didn't even like the goddamn thing. I was like, oh, I've been putting this food on a pedestal. I've been restricting, this idea that it was the most delicious food ever. And actually it turns out that I can take or leave a donut. And I did the same thing with croissants. And I was like, oh God, I'm going to I'll never eat, I'll never stop eating croissants. And so I would encourage that, by the way, I can still, a plain croissant, definitely, I'm in. That is worth it. I love it. Yes. For years, I just had this fixed set of ideas and stories around particular foods. And I hadn't questioned them. I just had all these internalized ideas around particularly carbs. Carbs was the thing that I really had a lot of hang-ups about. I had a lot of stories around carbs. And so that was the first step for me. And I really encourage listeners to just, with curiosity and kindness, choose something that you have decided that you can't possibly have that. And just see how you feel about it. Maybe you do still love it and enjoy it, but you might actually find that you won't eat pizza for the rest of your life if you allow yourself to eat it. But it's a process, and it's a long, as you know.
Very long.
Yeah, it's really long.
I often say there's a honeymoon phase that some people go through with particular foods where it's like you had forbidden yourself that food for so long that then once it's on the table again, once you allow yourself to eat it again, you feel like that's all you ever want to eat, and that will pass too. Like that is not forever, right? That's a short-term phase that if you can allow yourself permission to go through it and to continue eating the food, even when it's all you want to eat, and like tell yourself, yes, I still have permission to eat this anytime I want, as much as I want, for however long I want, I'm allowed to eat this. It will eventually dissipate. And yeah, that food might become like the croissant, which I love too, where it's just like something that you really enjoy and you still eat whenever you want it, but it's not like this forbidden fruit that you're always going to. And then sometimes it's like the food doesn't even taste that good, right? Like there's definitely lots of those things in my past too, where I was forbidding myself the food because I thought it was bad, quote unquote, bad morally. And then, I just realized like, oh, I don't even like it that much once I actually have permission to eat it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really remember that, particularly with croissants. That was like it was a really long, me and croissants had like a really long love affair. Because you have to go on that journey. And so I remember, there was a coffee shop on the way to work. And if I felt that desire, I had to honor it. And you have to honor it. Like, okay, cool, I'm going to eat another croissant today. And it can be stressful. And, I'm laughing because, I'm not trivializing at all because it is a long process, and it's only, now I still love croissants. Like I absolutely love croissants, but I also don't have that feeling of like, one, they're not naughty. Two, I'm not a bad person for eating them. And like, I know that I won't just eat them forever. And in terms of carbs, like, I eat carbs every day, and I used to eat meat, and now I don't eat meat. So it's the other thing, isn't it? With wellness, I was, like, you have to be quite carnivorous, and now I'm a vegetarian. I don't know what would happen if I fell into wellness. Like, you would just, what would I live on? Air and exotic ingredients.
Well, it's so interesting too that like wellness has these different pockets, right? Because there's like the carnivorous pocket that's very like, I don't know, I think of that as like gym culture. And yeah, then there's the vegan culture and like vegan vegetarian where it's like still so wellnessy, but the complete opposite recommendations. And yet, these two things kind of coexist in our society right now in like the same weird airbrushed spaces.
Yeah, it's true. I was probably more back in the day, it was the rise of, that gym like carnivorous thing. Like now it makes me feel a bit ill. In fact, a funny story about that kind of vegan side. My sister messaged me. She messaged me the other week, and she said, "What do you think about? I'm thinking about going on this yoga, whatever it was." She goes, "But the woman who's running it says you can only eat for 2 weeks." And I was like, just like with vegetables or just?" She was like, "Just." Oh, it's a detox. I was like, absolute bullshit. I could not believe that someone was suggesting. I was like, you would just shit yourself, quite frankly, for like 2 weeks. Like, well, no.
And starve yourself too. Like that's such a recipe for disaster, especially for anyone who has any sort of disordered eating, which, the vast majority of us do in this culture.
Oh, absolutely. I was horrified. I was genuinely horrified. Yeah, that was the thing. So yeah, you're right. I think that veganism is so, not to bash veganism, as like someone who's into like environmental activism, like I'm not totally bashing veganism, but that veganism wellnessy type aspect, that little, that chunk there. I think that my wellness phase was before that wave. I feel like that trend is really prevalent now, where it wasn't quite so prevalent sort of 6 years ago. It was definitely still there, like raw food diets. And God, there's just so many, aren't there? There's just so many fads.
So many. They come and go, and some of them circle back. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah, and I think the last thing that I did before I really fully healed it was because again, it's that part of this, A-type personality somehow that's linked to like productivity, and so was the last thing I did, but it just made me drink copious amounts of coffee. I was just like, this is not healthy in any way. I'm just
So you actually were able to kind of see how detrimental it was in the time.
Yeah, I think by then I had healed my relationship so much, like to a point. I think there's always a point where maybe diet culture is so maybe not like the beauty standard is so oppressive that it's easy, even when you are quite far along in your journey to loving yourself, to be tempted to dip your toe back in. And there's some very seductive research around about cells and, does it fend off dementia and like all of this stuff, right? Still a bit early stages and a bit dubious and all this kind of stuff, but it's enough to be seductive, that perhaps it is really good for your health if I whatever. And for me, I now know that like I see it, my status as recovered disordered eater / recovered dieter, a bit like a recovered alcoholic in a way. I feel like not that I can fully profess to knowing exactly, it's not the same. I understand that it's not like an addiction, but I mean in the sense that I can't diet a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? There's no kind of like putting your toe back in, because for me, it triggers so much stuff. I'm immediately feeling crap about my body, pinching and pulling and, like all the negative thoughts. And, it's, I see it as recovery in that sense, that a relapse is possible. And it just, all that stuff that happens, all those thoughts come back and you're God, it's good sometimes to be reminded how awful it is and how you don't want to go back there.
And yeah, to know that you can't put your toe back in and do like the wellness thing too. Sounds like that was a real slippery slope for you as well.
Yeah, I just reject everything about that. Just so much of it is really just toxic, really, really toxic. And sometimes because I reside now in this like beautiful community of, Anti Diet Riot Club and my own stuff and the body positive world, it's easy to think that it's getting better. And I think maybe it is getting better. On the one hand, the fact that we do have such a great counterculture and there is such a body of research now to say that like diets in the long term do not work. We have so much research now. It is getting better on the one hand, but sometimes like I put my head above the parapet on like Instagram or whatever, and the bombardment of how women in particular, young women, are meant to look. There is still so much work to do, like it is getting better, but I really so want to like protect all of the young women, that you don't have to look like that.
Yeah, you don't have to look like a face-tuned version of yourself from Snapchat. That's not real.
How tiny women are supposed to be. Like it makes me so angry. It makes me angry to think about, like I'm not angry with my mum. She grew up in the 60s, like this, she was doing her best.
She was in the shadow of Twiggy too, which like the diet culture at that time was so oppressive.
Oh, totally. So I'm not angry with my mum, but I am angry at the machine that profits off, my unhappiness, that fed me lies that there was something wrong with me. And at least when I was growing up, I didn't have Instagram. Fuck knows, quite frankly, what would have happened to me had I grown up in Instagram. It was hard enough for me when I was buying, magazines. I got Facebook. Like I'm not that ancient, I'm like mid-30s. I got Facebook in, university, and Facebook to start with was about like how drunk you got at a party. Like that's what Facebook was originally about. It was like, look how, you sweat. I had to go back and recently, a couple of years ago, and be like, wow, that picture really should not be online. That's what Facebook was originally about, showing your good times. You were sweaty at a party, and it was like, yeah, we had this really great time. Now it's so airbrushed, and you have to be perfect, and it's, oh God, fucking Love Island. Do you have Love Island?
Ugh, I think so. Yeah. I don't watch it, but I've seen commercials for it. It seems awful.
God, it's so awful. It's so awful. And, and the Kardashians have got so much to blame. So much to blame.
And also these tech companies. I talked about this somewhat recently on the podcast. I watched this documentary, The Social Dilemma. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on Netflix, but
Yeah, I haven't yet built myself up to it, but I'm currently on an Instagram break because I just needed to get off the hamster wheel. But yes, I know all of
same. I mean, it's made me go on basically a break from Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything except for when I have to promote something for the podcast or, share something that somebody wants me to share or whatever. I'll like pop in and do it and then just get out. And I'm not looking, at the notifications or whatever, because I was already having issues with the social media world and learning about the tech companies' terrible business practices over the years that made me quit Facebook. Like I deleted my personal account, a year ago or something. And then watching The Social Dilemma, I think it just kind of brought together all these different threads of like, news articles I'd read here and there and kind of tucked away in the back of my mind. It's like it just ties them all together into this really cohesive argument about how basically tech companies are profiting off of our monetizing our attention and changing our behavior in these subtle ways and creating addiction, creating like addictive like behaviors with these forms of technology in order to keep us hooked, in order to sell us more stuff. And, I think they have a huge burden of blame in this, in the way that diet culture has started to take over the minds of younger and younger kids, because giving kids something that addictive with the likes and sort of exploiting human psychology of wanting to compare ourselves, wanting to be seen, wanting to be validated, like all of that stuff is so natural and real and human. And yet these technologies like exploit those vulnerabilities, and the machine learning and the AI in them is actually geared towards fight or flight. Like it picks up on like what creates the fight or flight response in our brains. And that's what gets amplified by the algorithm. So that's why like the outrage machine is so huge, because, the things that provoke outrage, that provoke negative response are the things that get pushed to the top, not like nuanced, subtle, thoughtful conversations.
Yeah, it's true. And just on its most like surface level though, if you're if you're like 16 and you're into, I don't know, Kim Kardashian, like you're going to be served up more influencers that are just this clone type body. It's so problematic. I'm pleased that documentary exists, even in its horror, in the hope that there will be change.
I really hope so. I really hope that we can start regulating these tech companies and just pulling back the curtain on what they're doing and how it's affecting our brains. And one thing that, I had read this and then they talked about it in a film too. And on the website for this organization that's featured in the film, there's like a lot more content about this, that like dozens of people who work in the tech industry have been interviewed saying like, oh, I don't give my kids technology. My kids aren't allowed to be on social media, right? Like it's so wild.
Yes, I was going to say that.
These are the people who are developing the technology, who know how it works, who know what goes into it and how it affects our brains, and they don't let their kids have it. Like, what does that say?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I do feel like I need to, like, the Instagram is not entirely bad because in the same breath, isn't it? It's like in the same breath, it's like, and what I think is amazing about social media is that I think about myself. I grew up in rural, like the rural deepest West Wales, as far away from diversity and, as possible. And I do think about people, young people like myself who can find other humans like them, and feel not alone. So it's hard, isn't it, to balance out the positive and the negative. I've met so many wonderful people who've become friends in my industry. So I know it can create a lot of community at the same time. It's just, it's this, we don't know how to handle this behemoth that we've created. That's what it is. It's just,
on the business model too, that there's someone who's featured in that documentary who I've really been digging his work and kind of knew about him for years, but he's this guy, Jaron Lanier, who's like a longtime tech industry guy and critic, tech industry critic. He was like there at the start of the internet, at the creation of the internet, and has been doing virtual reality software.
can you imagine that day?
I know, right? Like Al Gore switches it on. But, he was like, there were these sort of two camps at the outset of the internet. There was like the socialist camp and the libertarian camp. And the socialist camp was like, wanting the internet to be like a place that was, beneficial for people and like centered the people. And the libertarian camp was like, let's let market forces figure it out and like let's, monetize everything. And the tension between those two camps ended up where it ended up as to why we have everything is free, quote unquote. All the social media sites are free, supposedly, but actually they're monetized by the fact that we are the product. Like our attention, our putting attention toward advertisers' content is what the social media companies sell to make their money. And, Jaron Lanier's point is like that the internet is like beautiful and so full of possibilities. And he's like still such a fan of it, like such a, has so much hope for it. And yet the way that it's been structured is what takes away so much of the benefit and makes it this toxic, unsafe space that's dividing us and causing bullying and all these social ills. And like that we could actually design a better internet that doesn't have that underbelly, or that has much less of it anyway, that like still gives us the benefit of community and connection and like bringing together people with common interests, which is wonderful. And also like such a part of like how I've built my career these last 10 years or whatever. It's amazing. It's connected me with the anti-diet movement. It's, brought me in contact with all these great colleagues and people around the world like you and so many other podcast guests. Like it's amazing. And yet it's killing us, as a society.
I know. And and that's the thing about, diet culture is so linked to capitalism. You can't talk about one without the other. And again, it's a really interesting discussion, isn't it? How can where do we go from here? I mean, who knows, right? I mean, 2020, what a year.
I know. Not what any of us expected.
Yeah. So I have days where I'm like massively hopeful and feeling like there's a big tide changing, and yet you're right, like the machine, the system that we are fighting is so massive. It is. We need total system change for so many things, diet culture being one of them, but just, for everything, to tear it all down and rebuild it.
Yeah, racism, patriarchy, capitalism, all of it.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. And there's so much work to be done in the world that what I get so passionate talking about is that your body is not the most important thing about you.
Yes.
That's the thing. There's so much work to be done in the world. And that's my, we were talking a little bit this before, wherever you are on your journey, your body is the least interesting thing about you. But at the moment, I'm thinking about, where my work in the future is going to be is that, thinking about whether even body positivity keeps you fixated on your body, even if you're talking about it in a real, like, even if you're championing your body. And as you just have to look around at how much work there is to be done. It's like, cool, okay, well, I am so your biggest cheerleader, that you love your body, but what else can you do? Like, you're a universe of amazingness that you can't possibly see. And so to just look out and let's stop fixating on bodies at all. That's my big thing.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important to have life beyond. I talk about like life beyond diet culture, and it's like life beyond even body positivity, right? There's a way to, I know people who are very body positive, body liberated, whatever you want to call it, in their own life, fat accepting people who are fat and embrace the term. And it's just not a thing for them because for whatever reason, I have one friend who like somehow miraculously never dieted, and she's fat and she's like proudly fat and like, it was just like this miracle unicorn of a human, and I love her. But, there's other friends who like certainly went through went through the stuff, but then got to the other side and got to a place where it just, became integrated. Fat acceptance became integrated into their life so that they're not having to spend all the time learning about it and processing it, and now are able to like go on and do, turn their attention to things that they really care about in the realm of like social justice or career stuff or creativity or whatever it might be. They're able to like devote their energy to bigger things.
Yeah, I'm not the first person to say it, but imagine if all the collective brain power of women could just be diverted to something other than thinking about food or their bodies. It blows your mind to think about how much energy that would create, and how many businesses would go out of business. Yeah.
That's why the industry is so opposed to us doing that. That's why they're co-opting terms like anti-diet and intuitive eating. That's why they're, pretending to be all about health and wellness so that we'll keep buying, so that we, because like you said, there is this counterculture that is so robust and growing, and you're a part of it and I'm a part of it. And it's wonderful. And I think it is helping people come out of diet culture or stop being on that hamster wheel of continuing to diet. And the diet industry is losing ground and is fearful. I've seen market research reports on this, that they're like, they know it's happening and they want...
Well, yeah, WW, hello.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. WW and, another diet that I won't name, but that calls itself an anti-diet and is just about, points and green, yellow, red categories of food, good and bad food. Like it's all the same stuff, calorie counting, it's all there. It's just they're trying to repackage it as something else because there is resistance growing to this. And so I think if we can like stay strong and see it for what it is and say no to that too, eventually the diet industry will crumble. And I know that's really hard because, it's easy for me and maybe you to sit here in privileged positions to say that, right? Like people who are not being constantly weight stigmatized every day, people who have resources, who have, doctors who aren't weight shaming us and telling us we can't have surgery unless we lose weight or whatever it might be. So there's like all of this other social and cultural stuff we have to address in addition before we can sort of have this massive uprising, or alongside of it, I guess. Those of us who can resist need to, and those of us who can't, the world needs to help make it possible for everyone to resist.
Absolutely. And I think that fat phobia is so endemic everywhere that I was having an interesting discussion with someone who said, do you think there'll be a fat uprising? And I mean that like fat in like, I use fat in the most reclaimed way possible, and I currently, like, I feel this is where people with thin privilege need to step in, because there's so much fat phobia that it's hard for people in bigger bodies to like want to stand up and yeah, obviously there are you have the fat liberation movement, but as a general populace, like people in bigger bodies are massively stigmatized. It needs people with privilege, thin privilege, to be vocal and out there and changing things, because it's hard for people in bigger bodies to do that.
Yeah, it takes so much to even get to a place of fat acceptance and being able to reclaim that identity.
Oh, it's seen as so radical. It's seen as a massively radical thing. Yeah. And it's so interesting. I mean, I can't believe myself, looking back at my own journey, that I can use fat in such a positive way. Like if someone had said, it can have such sting, it can ruin like whole days, whole weekends. It's a real, it's seen to be such a negative word, but you can reclaim it. It's a long journey, but there's so many great resources out there. There is such a wonderful counterculture to bask in and find solace. That if you told me, 15 years ago, would you be able to be talking so openly about your, body and using fat in an entirely neutral term, I would have said absolutely no way. Absolutely no way. But it is possible to heal your relationship with food and your body.
Yeah. Oh, it's so brilliant. And I mean, that brings me to a good segue of telling us about your work, because you are part of this counterculture. You're part of this like community. You've created a couple of great communities online for people to connect around diet recovery. So can you share a little bit about Anti Diet Riot Club and your new venture as well?
Yeah, so I met Becky Young a couple of years ago. Becky Young founded Anti Diet Riot Club in the January, and we met in the April. So it was real like a baby like venture. I think Becky had done like her first event in the January. And it's interesting because I had journaled the name Anti Diet Riot Club, an idea that I had come up with. And Becky has executed it so much better than I could have. But I thought it was really interesting that someone else had had like the same idea at a similar time, very synchronicity kind of vibes. And we met for coffee, and it was like love at first sight. We absolutely just hit it off so much, and we had very similar ideas. So then I became co-creator at Anti Diet Riot Club, and we're normally what is normal, but we host in-person events, and we both wanted to create a space that was really countering the traditional diet club, where people could come together in person and feel safe and supported in the anti-diet movement. So we do a lot of festivals and workshops. We have a bus now, a riot bus, that we haven't actually been able to take on the road yet because of COVID-19, but we crowdfunded this money for a bus. In fact, I think you had Becky on
I did.
just before. We were building the bus, and so the bus is built. We have a riot bus, so that when we're able to gather in person again, we will be taking our beautiful turquoise bus on the road. And we're a radical movement that helps people celebrate their bodies. We're sex positive and inclusive, and all of the, it's a really wonderful. We did a festival, really great community online. We reached 100,000 followers the other month on Instagram. So it's all like a wonderful community. And we're about to launch a membership. So you're first to know, actually, Christy, that is coming.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. Like everything, we've had to pivot because, and we just think that we used to do this a monthly life drawing class in London that would have like 20 people. And then because of COVID, we decided to host it online, which we never, ever would have done. And actually, our first class, we got 100 people in our first class.
Wow. That's amazing.
It's so amazing to see people, tuning in from the States and Europe. And so it's been like a really amazing pivot that we had to do out of necessity, but it's been really great. So we're launching a digital membership. And then in my own business, I coach mainly women how to get off diets and live and eat intuitively. But I recently launched a new concept called Wonder Collective, which is, I touched on it before, people who are able to identify as come a certain point in their journey where they feel they've accepted their body, and there's a monthly theme, for example, curiosity or courage, vulnerability, self-compassion. And it's basically helping people use these, I call them pillars of wonders. They're kind of like values that people can take into their life to help expand themselves into living the life that they want to and that they desire, because there is, as we said, there is so much more to life than your body. And where's the space to kind of talk about that within the anti-diet lens? You still need that feeling of shared experience and moving forward and outwards and onwards. So I'm doing that. I've got a book out called You Are Enough that was published last year. And so I do writing at harrirose.com, got a blog. Those are the two main projects.
Oh, that sounds awesome. I love everything you're doing, and I love that you're working on this sort of next phase of recovery for people, because I think that is so needed. And I've thought about that too. It's like, what can I give people who are in that sort of phase of recovery where they've healed their relationship with food in their bodies to a great extent and are in solid recovery, but, kind of looking to expand their lives beyond diet culture and beyond body acceptance work too.
Because that's what we should be, we shouldn't need to have to shout how much we love our bodies all the time.
Right.
Ultimately, like that's my goal, is that we shouldn't have to do that. So it's helping people, to acknowledge that part of their journey and then helping them move to the next phase.
We'll put links to all that in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you online. And this has been wonderful conversation. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Harri.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
So that is our show. Thanks again so much to Harri Rose for joining us on this episode. Thanks to Ayana Habtemariam for her great answer in the Ask Food Psych segment. And thanks to you for listening. If you want help healing your relationship with food, you can get support from me for free by going to christyharrison.com/strategies. There you can sign up for my email list and get my free audio guide, 7 Simple Strategies for Finding Peace and Freedom with Food. Just go to christyharrison.com/strategies to get it. If you've gotten something out of this podcast and want to help spread the anti-diet message, you can share this episode and subscribe to the pod on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. You can see lots of different places to do that at christyharrison.com/subscribe. That's christyharrison.com/subscribe. And you can also leave us a nice rating and review in your podcast provider of choice, which is another way to help new listeners discover us and is always so appreciated. To get full show notes from this episode, including all the resources we mentioned, plus a full transcript, just go to christyharrison.com/265. That's christyharrison.com/265. And to get the transcript, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and enter your email address. This episode was brought to you by ThredUp. ThredUp is the largest online thrift store with up to 90% off your favorite brands. Get an exclusive offer of an extra 30% off your first order when you go to thredup.com/foodpsych. That's thredup.com/FOODPSYCH for 30% off your first order today. Terms apply. A big thanks, as always, to our editor and sound engineer, Mike Lalonde, our community and content associate, Vinci Chue, our administrative assistant, Julianne Watasik, and our transcriptionist, Mycroft Holmes, for helping me out with all the moving parts that go into producing this show every week. Our album art was photographed by Abby Moore Photography and designed by Melissa Alam. Our theme song was written and performed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs. And I'm your host and producer, Christy Harrison. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.